Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our Monday Motivation Spotlight. I'm Lesley Kaplan, welcoming you here again every Monday, same time, same place, and usually the same place. Today we have a double event, so make sure you stay with us if you're joining live. We're going to be running through till 9:25, then we have a 5-minute break, and then we're going to be starting our second part, our Professional Women's Networking Forum, where we have a panel of awesome guests talking about personal and business relationships during turbulent times. So if you're not joining us live and are watching the recording, then please make sure that you check this out on our YouTube channel. So how do we work? Today we have an awesome guest, my friend and colleague who I'll introduce in just a moment. This is not an official networking group, unlike the second part. So if you are wanting to share your links or anything about your business in the chat, feel free to do so. I remind you that this whole Monday Motivation Spotlight was formed due to the war, and yes, another unfortunately sad and challenging week for Israel. Thank you to our sponsors and co-hosts, co-hosted by ACI, and to our co-sponsor, Nishika Honey. So thank you very much. All right, so what I'm going to do is to spotlight our guest for the day. Our guest for our first half on our Monday Motivation, as I say, my friend and colleague, Sharon Altshul, who I've known for, I think it's about 12 years, 11, 12 years, going back that we first met through ACI. Sharon is a freelance photographer. She's a writer, and her work has appeared in many, many places, just to name a couple: the Jerusalem Post, Report, the Baltimore Jewish Life. I won't go into the entire list. She also has a government press pass, which means that she gets to cover and get exposed direct and behind the scenes information to a lot of the government events and special events. And she's going to be sharing a lot of what she's allowed to share with us today, some exciting stories about her experiences covering these events, but also who is Sharon Altshul. Tell us a little bit about your aliyah and behind the scenes. Sharon, good morning. Delighted to have you here. Take it away.
Thank you, Lesley. This is sort of my coming out from behind the camera. I've been taking photos since I was very young, back in the days when, way before digital, when my father had to pay. My father paid for the photos, and you really had to set up the frame and take a picture and not do all the post editing now that, I don't know, it's considered photography. But I lived in multiple cities over the years, Richmond, Virginia, multiple places in New York, the Boston area, Silver Spring, Maryland, Western Canada, Vancouver, British Columbia, and Melbourne, Australia. We made Aliyah in August 2006 in the middle of what now we call the Lebanese War. We were such newbies, friars, that when we went to Haifa to claim our lift, we were so excited. The parking lot was empty. Like, there was plenty of spaces. What were they talking about? And as we pulled away, we get this frantic call from relatives, "Are you okay?" And we're like, "What do you mean?" So, well, there was just a rocket attack in Haifa while you were there, and we had no idea. But that was why the person before us wasn't in the office, because she had been in a bomb shelter. So we've kind of learned a few things since then and been around. But there were a lot of firsts when we made Aliyah, of course. In the first time, I didn't have a car of my own for so many years. So I started walking, and I walked everywhere. We moved straight to Jerusalem. And that was, as you can, if you do the math, 18 years ago almost. And I would walk around, and every day I would see something. Why doesn't anybody ever see this, would go through my mind, because it was never something I had seen in the mainstream media. There were one of the defining moments. I was walking to Upan, and I'm standing on the corner, and at 44 Jabotinsky, 3 workers were taking down a sign that said Hebrew University, 44 Jabotinsky, and they took it down and they stomped it in half, and I guess they threw it away. Now I would have the chutzpah to run over and grab it from them. But that was one of the sites where the library was relocated from Har Tzofim, from Mount Scopus, when access wasn't available. And Israel, unlike the British, Israel turned many of these places that the British had confiscated back to the Christian church, and the nuns are there now in a renovated facility, which one day will be a blog because I have it in draft for years. But that was a moment I said, okay, I'm going to stop carrying my camera in my backpack and put it in my pocket and have it in my hand, and started taking photos. There were a few incidents over the years that really got me going, and I decided I had to publish them. And we won't mention the organization because they're not around anymore. They wouldn't take my photos. They didn't know me, whatever. So I decided I was going to self-publish and began my website, The Real Jerusalem Streets. I'll put links for all these things in the chat later if you want to check it out. I used to be very anonymous. I was going to be the candid camera of Jerusalem. That didn't quite happen. My tourists of the week were a fun column that I did in the beginning, but that I kind of stopped with. And the Jerusalem Post even asked me once to be the new immigrant, and I gave it to someone else because that was years ago, and I was going to be behind the camera and not in front. As of yesterday, I published 13,670 photos on my site. One that I am most proud of was years ago. If you remember, there was this in Jerusalem, the Mamilla Cemetery, and the fake graves became a topic that actually did make headlines. And I found out afterwards that one of my photos was used in the criminal case, the court case, to about the fake graves, because as I had walked by one day, I had snapped a photo quickly of them working in that cemetery. And I was actually quite proud of that. That was a highlight that whatever I was doing did some good, I thought. I was one of a lot of firsts besides walking. I was one of the first bloggers, the Times of Israel. And over the years, I've done multiple posts on Israeli Cool and Elder of Zion when I wanted to do something that was more political. My Real Streets is family friendly more, we'll call it, or Parva doesn't get, it doesn't excite, it doesn't exploit. But when I have something that's important, for example, years ago, 3-4 years ago, I wrote a post and Elder of Zion published it about the funding for American universities. There is a law, it has been around for decades, that foreign governments or sources had to report, universities had to report if they received over $250,000 from a foreign entity. And believe it or not, they weren't doing it. And during COVID, there was a webinar that I saw and thought it was important that, but we'll see whatever happens with that. I also was one of the first with the Professional Women's Network at AACI, actually before Lesley, was started by Ilana Rosenman. And if I may, I'd like to give a special mention to Sheila Bauman from AACI, because from the very, very beginning, she encouraged me to keep going when most other people thought I was ridiculous and not. And she has still and consistently been a source of encouragement. So I do have a lot of credit for AACI, Professional Women's Network, Lesley, and Sheila back at the very start. It wasn't AACI that I realized I was an entrepreneur. how many times I had moved the family, not just down the street, but around the world, across the country for my husband's career, and each time had to start over. I will not list the things I've been doing. It's too long, but currently I do the freelance reporting, mostly as Lesley mentioned, Baltimore Jewish Life, the Jerusalem Report, and I especially am fond to put in JNS, the Jewish News, because those are syndicated, and once in a while they get picked up and spread other places. When you post online, you have absolutely no idea where something will go, how it will resonate, and that's what you do. I did get my college degree in chemistry and worked in a lab at Rockefeller University before my first child and moving to Boston, where they decided that it's such an honor to live in Boston. They don't have to pay you nearly as much as they do in New York. And that was the end of the science career for a few decades. Here in Israel, there was life before and after COVID. Before, there were, in 2019, there were conferences and events in Jerusalem. There were too many to keep up. If you remember the end of January 2019, when President Rivlin had 50 leaders from around the world here. I mean, it was just so different. And in those days before, I was Zooming when nobody else was. I didn't even realize what it was, to be honest. I was doing photos of what was happening and sharing them in senior residences in America. I would put up my photos of things they wouldn't have seen in the week. I had people who had been to Israel 100 times and some who had never been, but I could always promise them with President Rivlin that there was something I could share them that they hadn't seen. Lesley asked me to focus on some of the behind the scenes. So this actually turned out to be a perfect week with all the Yoms, Yom HaShoah, Zikaron, and Yom HaAtzmaut. When anyone had told me something was impossible, that was a mistake. I had to try. Yeah, Lesley, I saw that in your book. So we finished. So one of the examples was Har Herzl. People told me, oh, it's impossible to get to Har Herzl for the show and the fireworks. Well, I got there. Once I got sitting in the stands was a perfect location. One side, if you ever notice, one side is on camera and one side is totally off camera. So I was on the on camera side where they had all the military attaches from around the world posted, and the other side they had the Israeli military whose faces you never saw. Anyway, and that was fun. I did go back more than once with the press pass. As for the press pass, I was told it's impossible. Oh, it's so hard to get a press pass. And I did qualify. I mean, there are criteria you have to meet. They were much easier back then, but I got my government press pass when Shimon Peres was still at Beit HaNasi. So I'll tell you a few stories that you probably don't know. Once there was a group from the South. I confess the different operations have kind of blurred one after another every 2 years, but Peres was president and he invited children from the South to come to Beit HaNasi. And there was an live entertainment inside in the main room. And one of the entertainers put a live dove on Peres's head. And he didn't even seem to notice, but it was only for a few seconds, but I did get the photo. Another time also was at Beit HaNasi was a sukkah open house, and Peres was on stage. It was the first time I went on the platform with the media. And that open house, was set up in the garden and there was a strong wind. The semel, if you know, the big stand, fell over in his lap. So I found over the years, if I'm around, nothing ever happens. Cars can end up a millimeters from each other, but they don't crash. And the thing fell in his lap. So there he sat in front of hundreds of people in the audience. It must have been live too. And he sat still. He didn't blink. He put his hand in his pocket, pulled it out, combed his hair, and returned it to a pocket. And he went on. The production crew was going crazy, but he just sat there absolutely like totally nothing happened. And if you saw that video after he left office, there's a scene where they have him jumping out of a helicopter and landing and combing his hair. When I saw that the first time, I laughed out loud because it's absolutely true. It was just amazing. Another memorable moment at Beit HaNasi with the Rivlins, at the height of the stabbing intifada. They were busy day and night, and the youngsters were invited, youngsters like 2 to 7, very young children were invited for a special event at the president's house at Beit HaNasi. They had a carnival with a jumping in outside, and the Chama Rivlin had them all sit around her on the floor in that big room again to read a storybook. All of a sudden, there was a loud sound of an explosion, and the room went absolutely silent for a few seconds. No one breathed. And then when they realized it was a decorative balloon that popped, the party proceeded again. So I think that was the first and last time I remember seeing balloons as decoration inside the president's house. So the presidents, princes, and bellas have come and gone over the years. But this past week, with Israel's 76th Independence Day celebration, many things happened, even though because of the war, they were muted. There are a few that I would like to highlight that I don't think got enough attention. The first would be Sheryl Sandberg's movie, Screams Before Silence. It's available free on YouTube, and I highly recommend it. It is very tastefully done and respectfully done, and really kol hakavod to Sheryl for her being involved in this important project. It was shown, it's an hour-length film. It was shown at Beit HaNasi for the first time live in Israel. And what was interesting was some of the main characters in the film, both the abuse survivors, Zaka, producer, were there in the audience and spoke afterwards. That was very impressive. The International Bible Quiz was one of those places that say, oh, you can't get in, that's impossible. So I went back this year just to see how it was different than last year. And I almost didn't get in, not because of security. When I got there, I thought I was at the wrong venue. Usually in the last at least 10 years, there's been the white tents outside, and each year more security with screening and metal detectors. This year, there was absolutely nothing. There was one man sitting at the front desk, like a regular, boring, no theater night. And there was nobody outside and nobody in the lobby. I really thought I had the wrong place, but I did go upstairs where it's usually held. The theater was, well, I did go late because I didn't want to go through all the 16 people down to 8. I just wanted 8, 4, and 2. Of the contestants.
Exactly. By the way, as Ilana Goodman, who's in our meeting today, and she's a regular, she's a translator there. She said because the Prime Minister wasn't there. So that's exactly the reason.
It was absolutely, I think the people in the audience probably appreciated that the Prime Minister sent in by video, because it was such a different experience. But what I want to highlight about that was the audience, Ilana. They were so considerate and polite. This is an intense international competition, and the people there applauded when something was right, when something was wrong. They cheered on their own person that they were supporting, the locals especially. But any of the kids, they really were a very positive audience, I thought. That's why I wanted to mention them. And for the second year in a row, it was a tie. The other thing that I really want to make sure people realize, because it also receives very little attention on Yom Ha'atzmaut. There were so many things going on this year. It was absolutely impossible unless you were a team of 20 to keep up with it. And since it's just me, even though some people think I have in a whole office, but the annual reception at Beit HaNasi in the afternoon for the ambassadors, head of missions, and military ashtate is also something that I think is very important. In a world where it seems that we're just alone and isolated, the people came, the ambassadors, maybe not them all. I didn't notice all the Arab ambassadors from the Middle East there as usual. But the military ashtates were there from all over. They were smiling. They were in their uniforms. As I wrote in the blog, I love the thing where there's a table and they put those colorful hats when they come in. That's a tradition. And that's one of my favorite pictures of the year. I couldn't find the table at first. They moved the table for the third time. Each president sort of changes things a little bit. And they moved the table over where you come in near, with Herzl overlooking it this year. So it actually was a good placement. But I couldn't find it at first. Like, where's the table with the hats? But the bus with the, I guess from Tel Aviv area, hadn't arrived yet. So the hats were there later. That on Yom Ha'atzmaut, it was difficult this year how to celebrate and how not to celebrate. But I thought it was very tastefully done that they had the food in the reception instead of the usual wine and cheese Israeli focus, were on 5 different eating or different types of eating. They had HaYom from Netivot, who has a boutique bakery that was affected by the war. They had Nor, the Druze restaurant, where the woman owner made it kosher so that she could serve all Israeli soldiers. She had a table. And we're running out of time, so I won't go into everything, but I will share on the way out. I blurred so you can't see it so well. At Beit HaNasi, there, I know, I have to hold it near my face. At Beit HaNasi, they have 60 olive trees. And every year with President Rivlin, they used to make a big deal about harvesting, and he had different people and I would go. This they haven't done. But they make olive oil, presidential olive oil from those olives. And on the way out, I saw a little bag and I'm like, what is that? And she gave me one. So I actually got, first time ever, I got presidential olive oil. So that's it. I found that my stories, I like to take situations where people are down and highlight them. For example, Tamir Goodman, Joel Eckstein, etc. And I'll put some of my information in the chat. You can check it out later. And I'm proud that my latest story is in draft on the Bake Battalion, the Hamal Hamatok for the Jerusalem report, and the one on the Mezuzah project is now online.
Great.
That's just a few things, but there are plenty of things happening in Jerusalem that don't get media attention, and that's what I like to share.
Excellent. Sharon, thank you so much. So for those of you that joined, don't log off. I just want to sum up this and just say a couple of things, but we are continuing with the second part. Even if you don't like being in breakout rooms, still stay with us for the second part. It's going to be great. So Sharon, thank you so much for sharing those awesome things. And I know you have a lot more to share. I challenge you to maybe write a book about all your experiences behind the camera, because I know Sharon always likes to be behind the camera. So I think she even hesitated when I asked her to be in front of the camera today. So we're delighted. I'll share a very quick personal story about Sharon at the presidential house when President Rivlin was in office. So, once the court, they open it up to visitors. I think they still do. I'm not sure if they did it this year. But when he was in office, I wanted to go, and I wanted to be able to actually see the president and not just go that the house was open. So through Sharon, and I love your mug, Sharon. L'chaim. L'chaim. Okay. And through Sharon, I said to Sharon, do you know what time the president's going to be there? And she gave me the hours that she knew when the president was going to be coming out and shaking hands and greeting people. And I got to actually shake the president's hands twice, once inside and once outside. So that's totally with thanks to Sharon, because she knew behind the scenes exactly when the president was going to be there. So, ladies, I want to officially end off the recording for here. So thank you for joining our Monday Motivation Spotlight. See you next week. We have a very fascinating guest next week. Her name, if many of you may know her, is Chaya Ben Baruch. She is a fascinating person. After giving birth many years ago to a child with Down syndrome, she then went on to adopt her and her husband, went on to adopt 4 more children with Down syndrome, in addition to their own regular family. She's also an acupuncturist, and she does work with Chayal's Angels, who we featured before, going around to IDF bases. And she's also one of the co-owners of Nishikahani, one of our co-sponsors here. So thank you, and we look forward to seeing you with Chaya next week. So I'm going to officially end off this recording. Stay with us, and thank you for joining the Monday Motivation Spotlight.